My husband slammed the divorce papers on the kitchen table and said, "I'm done with you. She makes me feel young again." I felt my hands shake, a tremor that started in my fingertips and rattled all the way to my teeth as he walked out without even looking back. The sound of the heavy oak door clicking shut echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. I stared at the papers, the black ink blurring under the fluorescent kitchen light. 50 years. Half a century of ironing his shirts, rubbing ointment on his back when his arthritis flared, and raising 2 children in this very house. Now I was being discarded like a wrapper from a piece of candy he'd finished eating. Before we continue, please like and subscribe. Every like helps share the hidden suffering many elderly people go through. Please watch till the end to see how this grandmother endured everything. And comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. When he drove away, the tires of his truck crunching aggressively on the gravel driveway, I didn't know it was only the first cut he planned to make. I walked to the window, my knees popping with the effort, and watched the taillights fade into the dusk. He wasn't just leaving the house. He was driving away with my dignity, my history, and my security. I touched the wedding ring on my finger, the gold worn thin after decades of wear. It felt foreign now, heavy, like a shackle I hadn't realized I was wearing until the key was turned. I didn't cry yet. The shock was too cold for tears. I sat alone in the quiet house we built together, wondering how 50 years of marriage could be tossed aside like nothing. The silence was sudden and violent. Usually at this hour, the television would be humming with the evening news, or Leonard would be complaining about the draft in the den. Now, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. His coat, a beige trench he'd worn since the 90s, was still hanging by the door, retaining the shape of his shoulders as if he'd return. For a moment, I hallucinated that he would walk back in, claiming he forgot his keys, claiming this was a cruel joke. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach where instinct lives, I knew he wouldn't. Their affair had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. There were signs I had ignored. The late nights at the lodge, the new cologne that smelled like cedar and deception, the way he started hiding his phone screen when I entered the room. I had painted over those red flags with the brush of loyalty. A cold fear settled in my chest, not just of loneliness, but of the unknown. I was 72 years old. I had never paid the mortgage online. I didn't know the password to the retirement account. The shadows in the living room stretched longer, looking like grasping fingers. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself, shivering despite the heat being on. I knew with terrifying certainty that more secrets were coming. Our son, Calvin, called that evening. I picked up the phone, desperate for a sympathetic voice, for someone to share the outrage. Instead, he asked what I did to push his father away. His tone hurt more than his words. It was dry, impatient, lacking any warmth. "Dad says he's been miserable for years, Mom," Calvin said, his voice sounding tinny through the receiver. "You have to admit, you've let yourself go. You're always tired. You don't want to do anything fun anymore." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream that I was tired because I spent my days maintaining the home his father lived in and the family he abandoned. I realized then with a sinking heart that Calvin already knew about the younger woman. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't angry on my behalf. He'd been prepped. Leonard had gotten to him first, poisoning the well, painting me as the anchor dragging down his vibrant life. The betrayal began spreading through the family like a slow poison, turning my own blood against me. "It's complicated, Mom," Calvin sighed, clearly wanting to get off the phone. "Just try not to make a scene." He hung up before I could defend myself. I sat there with the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a hornet, realizing that my son, the boy I had nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, at the grocery store a few days later, I was squeezing avocados, trying to find one that wasn't too hard or too mushy, just to have something to do. My longtime neighbor, Arlene, approached me. Arlene had always been a gossip, the kind of woman who collected tragedies like trading cards, but I considered her a friend. She placed a hand on my arm, her face twisted in that pitying look that feels more like judgment. "Loretta, honey," she whispered, leaning in past the bananas. "I saw Leonard over in Cedar Creek yesterday, at that Italian place." She paused for effect. "He was with a girl, Loretta, and I mean a girl. She couldn't be older than 30. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and disbelief. The heat started at my neck and crawled up to my hairline. Cedar Creek was where Leonard and I went for our anniversaries. He looked happy, Arlene added, twisting the knife, laughing like a teenager. People were walking by with their carts, and I felt like I was standing there naked. I straightened my back, though it cost me effort. "Leonard and I are separating, Arlene," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "He's free to do as he pleases." I kept pretending everything was fine, putting a carton of milk in my cart with a steady hand, though inside I felt like I was cracking open. I wondered how long everyone else in town had known. How many people were laughing at the old woman whose husband traded her in for a newer model. My husband, Leonard, returned on a Tuesday morning. He didn't come to talk or to apologize. He came with empty cardboard boxes. He moved through the house like a tornado, gathering clothes, his tools, the good whiskey, and even the painting of the lighthouse we bought in Maine. I stood in the hallway, watching him. He looked different already. He was wearing a new leather jacket that was too tight across his stomach, and his hair was dyed a jarring shade of black that didn't match his eyebrows. When I asked him why he was taking the toaster oven, he scoffed. "I need to set up my new place, Loretta. You don't cook anymore anyway." He accused me of holding him back from being happy as he shoved his golf clubs into the back of the car. "I have 20 good years left," he spat, wiping sweat from his forehead, "and I'm not spending them watching you knit and complain about your hips." He spoke like I was a burden he'd been waiting to escape, a heavy backpack he was finally dropping by the side of the road. He didn't look me in the eye once. When he finally left, carrying the last box, he didn't even close the door behind him. It stood wide open, letting in the damp autumn air. The wind chilled the hallway, swirling the dust motes in the light, as if the house itself exhaled grief. I walked over and closed it gently. The click of the latch sounded like the final period at the end of a very long sentence. The younger woman, Dana, I learned her name from the return address on a package that accidentally came to the house, started posting pictures of them online.
I wasn't good with technology, but loneliness drives you to do things you shouldn't. I learned how to find her profile, and there they were. Dinners at steakhouses I considered too expensive. Vacations to beaches where Leonard was shirtless, sucking in his gut, holding a margarita. Dana had long blonde extensions and a smile that looked predatory. They were laughing like teenagers in every shot. I couldn't help but look, scrolling with my arthritic thumb, even though each photo felt like a physical punch to the gut. There was a picture of them on a boat, and the caption read, "Finally living my best life with my soulmate. 50 years of marriage, erased by a hashtag." I looked at my own reflection in the dark screen of the tablet, wrinkles around my mouth, gray hair, eyes tired and red. I felt ugly. I felt used up. That night, I couldn't bear to go into the master bedroom. The scent of his old cedar cologne still lingered on the pillows, a ghost of the man I thought I knew. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, curled up under an afghan, because the bed felt too big, a vast wasteland of memories I couldn't face.
Calvin stopped visiting completely. When I called to ask if he was coming for Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd kept for 15 years, he sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an obligation he no longer wanted. "I'm busy helping Dad rebuild his life, Mom. He needs support right now. It's a big adjustment for him." He sounded proud, almost excited, as if throwing me aside was a brave new adventure they were embarking on together. "Rebuild his life?" I whispered. "He destroyed mine, Calvin." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "Dana's really nice, by the way. She's helping him get healthy. You should be happy he's taking care of himself." The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, holding a pot roast I had already bought. I realized I would be cooking dinner for one for the first time in decades. I went through the motions, searing the meat, chopping the carrots, but when I sat down at the small kitchen table, the silence pressed heavy on my ribs. I took one bite, and it tasted like ash. I scraped the rest into the trash and turned off the lights, sitting in the dark, listening to the clock tick away the seconds of my solitude. My daughter Denise was my last hope. She had always been the sensitive one, the one who remembered birthdays. I invited her over for tea, hoping for an ally. She sat on the edge of the sofa, not taking off her coat, checking her watch every few minutes. When I started to cry, telling her about how Leonard had taken the savings account meant for home repairs, she didn't reach out to hold my hand. She stiffened. "Mom, look," she said, her voice practiced and cool. "We think you need to give Dad space. You're making this really hard on everyone with your victim mentality." Hearing her take his side broke something deep inside me that I didn't know was still intact. "A victim mentality?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He left me, Denise. He's spending our money on a woman your age." "Dana is 34, Mom. She's not a child, and Dad deserves to be happy. Just don't make things harder, okay? Don't force us to choose." But they had already chosen. I realized I had no allies in my own family. The people I had birthed, the people I had raised, saw me as the villain in their father's hero journey. When Denise left, giving me a quick air kiss on the cheek, the loneliness settled like dust in an abandoned room, thick, gray, and choking. Then the administrative violence began. Bills began arriving with his name removed from the joint accounts. The electricity, the water, the cable. He had systematically called every utility company and taken his name off, leaving the overdue balances to me. But the worst blow came when I went to the bank to withdraw money for groceries. The teller, a young woman who didn't know our history, looked at me with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson. This account has been closed. The funds were transferred to an individual account under Mr. Patterson's name 2 days ago." He had taken control of the retirement fund without telling me. Every penny we had saved for our golden years, the money for travel, for medical emergencies, for fixing the roof, was gone. I stared at the numbers on the little slip of paper she handed me. Balance, $0. I felt the blood drain from my head. I had $40 in my purse. That was it. I walked out of the bank, gripping the marble railing to keep from falling. The cars rushed by on the street, indifferent to my ruin. I realized how vulnerable I truly was. I was an old woman with no job, no savings, and a husband who was legally stealing our life. My hands felt cold as I wondered for the first time how I would actually survive the winter.
One afternoon, I needed to pick up a prescription. I decided to walk because I was trying to save gas money. As I was waiting at the crosswalk, I heard the rumble of a familiar engine. I looked up and saw our old truck, the Ford F-150 Leonard had bought 10 years ago. He'd promised me that truck would be for our gardening business when we retired. But he wasn't driving. Dana was behind the wheel. She was wearing big sunglasses and laughing, her head thrown back. Her hand was resting possessively on Leonard's arm. Leonard was looking at her with a dopey, adoration-filled expression I hadn't seen directed at me since 1978. They stopped at the red light right in front of me. I stood frozen on the curb, clutching my pharmacy bag. They were playing loud music, something with a heavy bass beat that rattled the windows. It felt like a violation. That was my truck. That was my husband. That was the life I had ironed and scrubbed and saved for. I turned away before they saw me, pulling my hood up over my gray hair. I stared at the brick wall of the bakery, tears hot and stinging in my eyes. It felt like watching a stranger steal my entire life and drive it away for a joyride, leaving me stranded on the pavement. A week later, I went to the pharmacy again, but this time the pharmacist frowned at her computer screen. She said, "Mrs. Patterson, your insurance has been declined." I stammered, "That can't be right. I'm on Leonard's policy. He worked for the union for 40 years. The pharmacist lowered her voice. "It looks like the primary policyholder removed you as a dependent effective yesterday." He had stopped paying for my health insurance. He claimed to the lawyer later that he wasn't responsible for me anymore. I sat on the bench outside the pharmacy, dialing the insurance company with shaking fingers. I was on hold for 45 minutes, listening to cheerful elevator music while terror gripped my throat. I had high blood pressure. I had arthritis. I needed those pills. When the representative finally answered, they confirmed the cancellation was intentional and final. Leonard had cut the lifeline. He didn't care if I got sick. He didn't care if I died. I felt the world tilt under me, the concrete sidewalk feeling soft and unstable. This wasn't just divorce. This was cruelty. This was an attempt to erase me. It was the 4th of July weekend. Usually we hosted a barbecue. I sat on my porch, listening to distant pop of fireworks, eating a sandwich of cheap bologna. I opened my tablet, a habit I was trying to break, but couldn't. And there it was. A barbecue was happening. Not at my house, but at Leonard's rental condo. The photos were posted by Denise. "Family first," the caption read. There was Leonard, manning a shiny new grill. There was Dina holding a beer and hugging Calvin. There were my grandchildren, wearing red, white, and blue, eating corn on the cob. My children were smiling beside the woman who had destroyed our family. They looked relaxed. They looked complete, as if I had never existed, as if I had died and they had finished mourning me years ago. I stared at the pixels, tracing the faces of my grandkids, wishing I could hear their voices. They hadn't even called to say Happy 4th. I was the ghost at the feast, the invisible woman. That night, as the fireworks exploded in the sky above my empty house, I cried harder than I had in years. I cried until my throat was raw, grieving not just the marriage, but the motherhood I thought I had earned. Leonard sent me a text message the following Tuesday. He didn't call. He didn't have the courage for that. The message demanded I return his belongings. He listed things like a collection of vinyl records, a specific set of tools, and his mother's antique clock. He claimed he had left them by accident. Then came the second text. "Stop playing the victim to the kids. You're being bitter and selfish. I need my things by Friday or I'm coming with the police." Bitter? Selfish? I looked around the house he had stripped bare. I was eating oatmeal for dinner to save money for the electric bill. I was wearing sweaters indoors to keep the heat low. Reading his words, the maliciousness of them, I realized he no longer saw me as a human being. To him, I was just an obstacle, a stubborn stain he couldn't scrub out. He had rewritten our history so thoroughly that in his mind, he was the victim of my bitterness. I didn't reply. I walked to the hallway, took his mother's clock off the wall, and put it in a box by the door. A dark numbness took its place in me. I wasn't scared of his threats anymore. I was just empty. The midpoint heartbreak, the moment that truly brought me to my knees, came when I finally called Calvin to ask if I could see the grandkids before school started. I missed them so much, it felt like physical pain. There was a long pause on the line. "Mom," Calvin said, his voice tight, "we talked about this. Dana and Dad feel uncomfortable with the tension you bring. We think it's best if you don't come around the kids until you sort yourself out." "Sort myself out?" I gasped. "I'm their grandmother, Calvin. I didn't do anything wrong." "You're negative, Mom. The kids pick up on it. Dad says you're unstable. Just give it time, okay?" As if I was the problem, not the man who abandoned us. As if my grief was a contagion they had to quarantine. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in the hallway, clutching the phone, looking at the growth chart pencil marks on the doorframe where I used to measure their height. They were growing up without me. I was being erased from their memories. I felt like a ghost haunting a house where no one could see or hear me. The stress finally took its toll. I collapsed in the kitchen that night. I had stood up too fast to get water, and the room spun violently. I hit the floor hard, bruising my hip and spilling the glass. I lay there on the cold linoleum, the room dark, my heart fluttering like a trapped moth. I was dehydrated, malnourished, and heartbroken. I couldn't get up. My hip throbbed with a sickening heat. I managed to drag myself to where my phone had skittered across the floor. I called Leonard. It was muscle memory, 50 years of calling him when things went wrong. He answered on the second ring, loud music in the background. "Leonard," I whispered, "I fell. I can't get up. Please." He didn't ask where I was. He didn't ask if I was bleeding. He sighed, an annoyed, heavy sound. "Loretta, stop it. I'm not falling for your attention-seeking games. Call 911 if it's real. Ask someone who still cares." And he hung up. The dial tone hummed in the darkness. His words carved the final wound, deeper than the fall. I lay there on the kitchen floor, staring at the dust under the refrigerator, realizing I truly had no one but myself. I didn't call 911. I gritted my teeth, dragged myself to a chair, and hauled myself up, screaming silently through the pain. The next morning, I woke up in my chair with a stiff neck and a bruised hip, but also with a strange clarity. The sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes. I realized they never loved me the way I loved them. Not Leonard, not Calvin, not Denise. Their love was conditional. It was based on my utility, what I cooked, what I could clean, what I could endure. Now that I was broken, they had discarded me. The truth was painful, searingly so, but it was also freeing. If they didn't love me, I didn't have to keep trying to earn it. I didn't have to perform for them anymore. I sat with my coffee, black because I was out of milk, letting the morning light touch my face. It felt warm. I was alive. I had pulled myself up from the floor. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine life without their approval. I looked at the empty space on the wall where Leonard's clock used to be and thought, good riddance. I started cleaning, really cleaning, not just tidying up, but purging. I went through the junk drawer in the kitchen, the one Leonard used to stuff with receipts and rubber bands. I was tossing things into a trash bag, old batteries, bent paper clips. At the bottom of the drawer, underneath a takeout menu from 2019, I found a slip of pink paper. It was an old lottery ticket. I remembered the day we bought it. It was back in February, months before he left. We had stopped for gas. I had handed him a $10 bill and said, "Let's get a ticket just for fun." He had laughed, called it a stupid tax, and shoved it in his pocket. He must have thrown it in the drawer and forgotten about it. He never checked them. He thought dreaming was for fools. I placed it aside on the counter, thinking nothing of it. It was likely expired or a loser. Yet a small voice, maybe the voice of that new clarity, whispered it might matter one day. I didn't throw it away. Weeks passed, and I slowly began fixing my routines. I couldn't control Leonard, but I could control me. I started walking each morning just to the end of the block and back to strengthen my hip. I started cooking real meals again, simple things like lentil soup and roasted chicken, because I deserved to eat. I found the number of a distant cousin, Mavis, who lived in Ohio. We hadn't spoken in 20 years. I called her. She was delighted to hear from me. We talked for 2 hours. She didn't know Leonard. She didn't judge. She just made me laugh about things we did when we were girls. My heart was still bruised, tender to the touch, but I was standing. I felt tiny sparks of myself returning. The Loretta who liked to paint watercolors, the Loretta who loved bird watching. Each day hurt a little less. The silence in the house stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like peace.
Denise visited briefly in late October. She didn't stay for coffee. She stood in the foyer holding a manila envelope. "Mom, Dad needs you to sign a few papers," she said, thrusting them at me. "It's just to finalize the financial separation so he can move on with his assets." I looked at the papers. They were dense legal documents. "I'm not signing anything without a lawyer, Denise," I said firmly. Denise's face twisted. "Oh my God, Mom, why do you have to be so difficult? He's offering to let you keep the house if you sign away rights to his pension. That's generous." "The house is in my name too, Denise, and I earned that pension just as much as he did." She became cold and distant, slamming the papers back into our bag. "You're impossible. No wonder he left." She walked out. I watched her go, and this time it didn't break me. I realized my children saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance, not a mother to be protected. I felt the last pieces of illusion fall away like dead leaves. I locked the door and made myself a cup of tea. That night I prayed. I sat by the window, looking at the moon. I didn't pray for their love back. I didn't pray for Leonard to realize his mistake. I prayed for strength. "Lord, give me the spine to stand tall. Give me the wisdom to protect what is mine." The house was quiet, but not as painful as before. It felt like a sanctuary now. I felt a tiny seed of peace forming in my chest. I was alone, yes, but I wasn't lonely. I was in the company of a woman who was learning to respect herself. For the first time since the divorce papers landed on the table, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I slept deeply, dreamlessly. The next morning, while waiting for the kettle to boil, I saw the pink slip of paper on the counter, the lottery ticket. I picked it up. It was for a draw that happened 6 months ago. I almost threw it out, but curiosity is a funny thing. I opened my laptop, I was getting better at using it, and searched for the past winning numbers. I scanned the lines. February 14th, the numbers on my screen matched the numbers in my hand. 04, 12, 19, 33, 45, and the Powerball number 07. My breath froze in my throat. I blinked, thinking my old eyes were deceiving me. I checked again and again. I ran my finger across the paper, feeling the indentations of the ink. It was a winner. It wasn't the billion-dollar jackpot, but it was a second-tier prize. $2 million. My hands shook, but not from fear. This time it was from shock. The kettle started whistling, screaming into the quiet kitchen, but I couldn't move. $2 million. I told no one, not Mavis, not my children, definitely not Leonard. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching the ticket to my chest. If I told them, they would descend like vultures. Leonard would claim it was bought with his money. Calvin and Denise would suddenly remember how much they loved their mother. I realized that this ticket wasn't just money, it was leverage. It was freedom, but only if I was smart. I tucked the ticket into a Ziploc bag and taped it underneath the drawer of my nightstand, a new hiding place. I sat quietly, letting the reality sink in. I wasn't poor anymore. I wasn't destitute. A warm strength flowed through me, like I finally had something that was mine alone, a secret garden they couldn't trample. I went about my day, gardening, humming a little tune, holding the secret inside me like a burning coal that kept me warm. It's amazing how intuition works, or maybe small towns just talk. Leonard returned weeks later. He knocked on the door this time. He was holding a bouquet of cheap supermarket flowers. He looked tired. The dye in his hair was fading to a weird purple. He said, "Loretta, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too hasty. I miss what we had." I stood in the doorway, blocking his entry. "What do you want, Leonard?" He chuckled nervously. "I heard someone in town won the lottery a while back, never claimed it. Made me think of that ticket we bought. Remember? At the gas station." He looked at me sharply. "Funny thing, right? It should have been us." I realized he suspected something. Maybe he found the receipt in his old jeans. Maybe he just smelled money. I stayed calm, my face a mask of stone. "I don't know what you're talking about, Leonard. You took everything of value when you left." I said nothing he could twist. I saw the greed in his eyes, hungry and desperate. The facade dropped quickly. "Don't lie to me, Loretta," he snapped, stepping forward. "I know you found it. That's my ticket. I bought it with my money. I want half. No, I want it all since you're living in my house." He demanded half of our ticket, insisting it was technically his property. He was red in the face, veins bulging. I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. I walked to the hallway table and picked up a document. It wasn't the ticket. It was a copy of the divorce papers he had shoved at me months earlier, the specific agreement his lawyer had drafted to ensure she got none of his future earnings. I handed it to him. "Read paragraph 4, Leonard," I said softly. He squinted at the paper. "All assets, known or unknown, separate or joint, are considered the sole property of the possessor effective as of the date of separation." His face drained of color. It turned a sickly shade of gray. He had insisted on that clause because he thought he was hiding money from me. He wanted to make sure I couldn't touch his future wealth with Dana. "You walked out in August, Leonard," I said. "You signed this. You made the separation date official. That ticket was in my possession. It's my property. You made that choice." He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had trapped himself in his own greed. You witch," he whispered. "Get off my porch or I'm calling the police for trespassing." He left furious, shouting obscenities down the driveway, kicking gravel, but he left, and he knew legally he couldn't touch a dime. I claimed the winnings anonymously through a trust. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't buy a mansion. I paid off the mortgage on my house so no one could ever take it from me. I set up a health fund so I would always have the best care. I donated to a shelter for women who had been abandoned. I eventually moved to a smaller, nicer condo in a community with a garden club and security. I changed my phone number. I heard from Mavis that Leonard and Dana broke up when the money ran out. She left him for a younger guy. Calvin and Denise tried to reach out when the news broke that the winner was an elderly local woman, but I didn't answer. I don't hate them. Hate takes too much energy, but I no longer chase their love. I have my friends, my painting, my peace, and my security. My message to anyone watching: don't let people take your kindness as weakness. Don't let them tell you you're past your prime.
And never ever apologize for choosing yourself when everyone else has chosen to leave you behind. If you face similar pain, please share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. I read them all. Thank you for listening to mine. May your heart stay strong no matter who walks away.